So, can you just tell us about your journey to becoming a nurse practitioner and then transitioning into the realm of energy healing?
Oh my gosh. Well, my story goes back to when I was a child because as we discussed before we got online here or on the record, a lot of times you are where you need to be to gain the knowledge and the wisdom that you have in order for you to carry on and do what your life's work's supposed to be. But for me, I'm just going to share the story. It's pretty much I was born an empath, intuitive, and highly sensitive person. So I came in, I grew up in the 60s. So this was an era of white picket fences. What are the neighbors going to think? And everything was supposed to look perfect on the outside, but it was a shit show on the inside. Okay. For lack of a better description. So being an empath, intuitive, and highly sensitive person at birth, I was born into a family where my mom was a product of an alcoholic household. So for her, anything that had to do with feeling, she just didn't go there. Her MO was ignore it, it'll go away. Well, I would, you know, naively try to ignore it and go away, and it kept growing bigger. So I would say to my mom, I said, it's not going away, it's getting bigger. So innately, I really got so we weren't allowed to feel in our household, okay, or express feelings or emotions. That's just the way it was. And so I needed to get another venue for myself to channel that energy. And so the arts are so important, especially music. And for me, I took to that like a duck to water. I really excelled in music. In fact, I was a concert clarinetist, and that was the pathway that I was heading towards as, entering my junior and senior year of high school to decide what I was going to do. Now, also in tandem with that little piece of information was that when I was in second grade, my dad ended up throwing out his back and needed to have back surgery, which he did have when I was in second grade. So I was probably about 7 years old. And he picked up a hospital acquired infection back in the mid 1960s, which was considered a death sentence, people,
Mm-mm.
because back then in the 60s, they didn't have the technology, the diagnostic ability with machinery and x-rays and MRIs and stuff like that, and also the medications like the antibiotics that would help people. So my dad, as a result of that, was in the hospital for over 2 months. He was on his deathbed. He received last rites in the Catholic faith that he was pretty much going to die. He did survive, but when he came home, he looked like a shell of the man that I remembered. He was probably down to 125 pounds, and his guy was robust at 180. That was like scary stuff for me because my mom would not let on that anything bad was happening, but intuitively I knew something was not right. So he survived that. And 4 years later, in about 1970, when his immune system got compromised, this whole sequela would reoccur, meaning that he would be in the hospital, he would be sicker than you could imagine. We didn't know if he was going to survive or whatever. That happened in 1970, 1972, 1974, and then in 1975. So my childhood was an emotional roller coaster like this. We weren't allowed to feel, remember that? So I really excelled in my music. That's where I poured all my emotion. So what had happened the last time this episode happened, my mom was at her wit's end. In fact, she was looking for alternative possibilities to help my father heal from what he was experiencing. And so, and you have to understand, this is mid 1970s. We didn't have computers, we didn't have Google search, we didn't have WebMD, we had the National Enquirer. Okay.
I
And I
remember
laugh
that.
about, yes, you do. And it was like, this is where a lot of lay people got their news and stuff and information. And so it just so happened that in the National Enquirer, this Reverend from Cairo, Michigan, Reverend Alex Holmes, who was a Presbyterian minister with the gift of laying on of hands, was being featured in an article because he assisted his brother from healing from leukemia. It
Mm.
wasn't him, but through him, he assisted his brother to heal. And also, Reverend Holmes in 1975 was doing this work for well over 25 years. So he had been doing it since the 1950s. So you also have to understand that this was on the cusp of woo woo, and it was just like considered like quackery or whatever. And so my mom was, grasping for straws because Western medicine had failed her tremendously. And at the same time in 1975, the first piece of um, diagnostic equipment came out called the CAT scanner. Okay.
Mm.
And so they put my dad underneath the CAT scanner, and they found that where his problem was stemming from was where he had his original surgery back in 1966. So
Mm.
anytime his immune system would get compromised, somehow this thing would raise its ugly head and just like, go crazy and create a lot of physical problems for my father, which required hospitalization, being in the hospital for 2 months at a time and being on his deathbed.
Mm.
So my mom was all over this possibility of having an alternative possibility. My dad, not so much. He was the biggest skeptic. He should have been from Missouri, the show me state. We joke about that because we grew up in Connecticut, but what had happened was he had said to my mom, only if the surgeon says it's okay. So it just so happened, my dad was in the hospital, my mom was there, and my mom walked out to the nurse's station, and his surgeon was sitting there, and she went up to him and said, doctor, I'm thinking about having the spiritual healer come in. Would that be okay? Surgeon's writing notes, looks up at her, says, sure, that would be fine. And my mom took that as a blessing, went and shared that information with my father. My father agreed. So my mom was all excited in all of this. Not 10 minutes passed from when she first came out to the nurse's station and when she returned, same doctor sitting there. She shared with the doctor, my husband agreed to have the spiritual healer come in. The doctor stopped what he was doing, looked up at her and said, what are you talking about? I never agreed to that.
Mm.
So this is where things were getting lined up behind the scenes to so I could share with you what transpired. Of course, my mom didn't share that piece of information with my father. And a month later, Reverend Holmes came from Carroll, Michigan to our home in Connecticut to administer his services and healing to my father. So what happened was this. I remember coming home. I was a junior in high school, and my siblings. I have a brother and two sisters, and my two grandmothers were there, and my parents and Reverend Holmes. And so, Reverend Holmes, he was just this very humble, beautiful soul. He had the most incredible energy, and he just was very observant.